Hello, my name is Roxanne Chabot from RBC Consultants. Welcome to another International Dermatology Education Foundation Educational Series webinar. This evening, we're going to talk about how to navigate the changing landscape of dermatology and industry relationships. As moderator, we have Dr. Leon Kircik, who is the president of the International Dermatology Education Foundation, clinical professor of dermatology at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York, Indiana University Medical Center in Indianapolis, and medical director of physician skincare, DermResearch, and skin sciences. We also have as our guest, Mr. Brian Hilberdink. Brian is president of Leo Pharma in the United States, as well as executive vice president of the global leadership. We'd like to thank our supporter, Leo Pharma, for making this educational event possible. Before we begin, a couple of logistic tips. If you're having issues hearing the webinar, you can listen to the presentation using your telephone. Just select phone call in the audio pane on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, after this webinar, a survey will be sent to you 1 to 2 days later to your email. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could fill in this short survey. Finally, within 1 to 2 days of the webinar, a certificate of attendance will be sent to you. So without further ado, I will pass the floor virtually to Dr. Kircik.
Thank you, Roxanne, and good evening, everyone. Greetings from Vegas. So we are very lucky today. We have our guest, the president of Leo Pharma, Brian. And Roxanne, can we go to the next slide, please? So welcome to another series of International Dermatology Education Foundation. And we are a nonprofit organization whose principal mission is to raise awareness and improve dermatology care all over the world through education, especially in underserved areas. We have done, as you know, several programs. Next slide, please. As you know, we have done several programs across the North America and globally, as well as Europe and South America, as well as Asia. And today, we are very lucky to have our guest tonight is the president of Leo Pharma. Next slide. Brian Hilberdink. Brian has just joined actually Leo Pharma, and we will have some fireside chat tonight. Brian, can you come up, please, if you can turn on your camera? Thank you. Welcome. Good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Kircik. Nice to see you.
Nice seeing you too. Welcome for joining us tonight. So what I'd like to start with, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about the history of Leo. And I know it used to be a nonprofit organization, and I know it's a Danish company, and it's sort of going to a change. Tell us a little bit about the history of Leo Pharma and where we're going to.
Yeah, I mean, I love being asked about the history of Leo Pharma, and I could really speak on the history for the rest of the night because it actually goes all the way back to 1908. Leo Pharma was actually the first real pharmaceutical company in the Nordics. The first export coming out of Denmark in healthcare actually came from Leo Pharma. And if you think about other Danish companies, like where I worked for the last 26 years, Novo Nordisk, Lundbeck is another Danish company. You know, the highest contribution to the Danish GDP is coming from innovative pharmaceuticals. It all started with this idea that a guy by the name of Anton Antons and August Kungstedt decided to buy an old pharmacy that dates back to 1620 called Löwens Apotheke, which in English means the Lion's Pharmacy, and hence the name Leo, and decided that instead of pharmacies being all compound pharmacies with a high degree of variability in terms of the products that they would make, that they would actually introduce a novel concept called quality control and be able to manufacture at scale. And that also led to them being the first manufacturers outside of North America for insulin, for my former employer, Novo Nordisk. You know, from that point forward, Leo Pharma has always been privately held. Now, when you talk about the transformation that the company is going through and the fact that it's been foundation owned since 1908, it was communicated some time ago that Leo sold part of the company to a private equity company called Nordic Capital. And Nordic Capital has been a fantastic equity partner investor in Leo. And the idea was to really take that money and fund the launch of tralokinumab, Adri, in the United States. Use that funding in order to acquire it, use that funding in order to really invest in the United States and turn it into the primary growth driver for the company. As of today, the United States contributes less than 10% of the global revenue, which is almost unheard of in our industry. But with the launch of Adri, which is kind of our big initial bet, and then of course we have some other bets in the pipeline and hope to be active from a business development standpoint, the idea is how do we turn the US into a growth engine? And having success turning the US into a growth engine, we've also communicated that we have an intention of finally taking this old company public and to initiate an IPO within the coming years, which is why I came over to Leo Pharma, is to be part of this really exciting transformation. That here you have this company that's with a fantastic history going back to 1908. It's made a decision to be focused in medical dermatology, has a pipeline that's focused in medical dermatology. We'll have business development activities that'll be focused in medical dermatology. And the idea is to take the company public, use that to help further capitalize the company, help use that to further fund research and development, and hopefully truly be seen as a leader in medical dermatology.
That's great. That was a great overview, Brian. And I know you recently joined Leo. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your history and how did you end up, or why did you end up, for that matter, at Leo?
Yeah, so as I alluded to before, I did work for another Danish company. So for over 25 years, I was at Novo Nordisk. I started in my home country of Canada, moved to Denmark, then moved to the US, then back to Canada, back to Denmark, back to Canada, and then finally made my way back to the US. So I did 6 cross-border moves with Novo Nordisk, and most recently was heading up the diabetes business unit and the sales organization at Novo Nordisk in the US. And prior to that, had responsibility for the Canadian affiliate, and also was responsible globally for the global commercialization of the future insulin portfolio, the insulin degludec franchise. Now, when I was first with Novo Nordisk in the US, going back to around 2003, there was a lot of question marks as to whether this small Danish company could actually make a go of it in the US. In fact, there was even conversation about potentially divesting the business in the US, and that Novo Nordisk should really stay focused on Europe and maybe some of the emerging markets, but it's just too competitive to break through in the US. And I don't know if this story is sounding familiar at all, but that idea for me to be able to kind of revert to where Novo was many years ago and come to Leo with its history, its heritage, its culture, its mission and focused in medical dermatology, which is very similar to Novo Nordisk and the focus that they had back in the day in diabetes, was to me just way too appealing of an opportunity to miss. And I love the idea that we're focused in medical dermatology. I love the fact that we're not big pharma. I love the fact that we can hopefully leverage our size to be more agile, and that can be an advantage and not a disadvantage. So it's an exciting journey to be part of, and hence the reason why I got lured away from a company that I have a huge amount of respect for, had a great kind of runway at, in order to be part of this transformation at Leo Pharma.
Well, welcome to medical dermatology. It's a great field. That's all I do. Most of us in dermatology do some cosmetics or a lot of cosmetics. I do only medical derm. So I'm very happy to see new faces, new blood in medical dermatology. Well, I think we should, the exciting launch, Adri, tralokinumab. I was part of the clinical studies. I think it's very exciting to get one more biologic in atopic derm. We have almost 11 biologics in psoriasis, and unfortunately only one. We had only one in atopic derm. Now you guys are launching Adri. So tell us a little bit about the post-pandemic, or even pandemic is continuing. How is the launch going? What are your expectations? How do you see the landscape in dermatology for atopic derm, especially for systemic medications?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the question. And I think it's been a fantastic journey that the company's been on, and to now launch into the atopic dermatology space with the second biologic creates a tremendous opportunity. I'm currently in Canada right now. I have a place up here. I'm trying to get some vacation in, but absolutely couldn't miss this opportunity. And there's a beer commercial that's on Canadian television for Alexander Keith's beer. You can buy it in the US as well. And the slogan for Alexander Keith says, "Those who like it a lot." And that's what I feel Adri is so far. Those who like it, those who tried it, tend to like it a lot. And I think, that's what I'm most excited about. We can talk about clinical data. We can talk about comparisons with the dupilumab. We can talk about comparisons relative to other systemic treatments. But when I hear from clinicians, when I hear about their experience, when we hear directly from patients in terms of the difference that it's making, and as you very well know, it's a very heterogeneous disease. And the idea that there is only one systemic treatment, one biologic that's a one-size-fits-all, well, that just doesn't describe the disease state. First off, atopic dermatology in general is still very much an underserved disease. Estimates of moderate to severe atopic dermatology, it's less than 10% that are receiving a systemic treatment. And that's primarily a function of the fact that a lot of patients never get to dermatologists. They're being treated by primary care, who are doing their best in prescribing topicals, but clearly aren't ready to take that step and prescribe something systemic. Even when patients get to dermatology, it's probably less than half that will receive a systemic treatment. And there's lots of reasons behind that, but I think the idea of having another option, and not just another option, but a mechanism of action that is specifically designed to go after what is the primary defect in atopic dermatitis, being the IL-13 cytokine, and to inhibit that cytokine, is a really exciting development. And again, I kind of thought about this presentation ahead of time and thought, I don't want to turn this into an Adri commercial. That's not why I came on here. I really want to introduce myself to, the medical dermatology community and have a good discussion about how things are going. But the one thing I will say, just as a shout out, is please talk to your medical representatives, talk to your medical scientific liaisons, make sure that you're talking to people to kind of understand the data behind Adri and how it can potentially fit in your practice, because we believe that there is a big place for Adri being a first-line product for bio-naive patients, so patients that have not achieved their treatment goals with using topicals. We think that Adri, being specifically designed for that, to inhibit that IL-13 cytokine, is an ideal treatment.
So what do you think the reason is that, as you put it a little bit ago, that the market penetration, right, it's less than 10% of the biologics right now for atopic dermatitis, despite the fact that with Dupi, it doesn't require any monitoring and it works pretty well. In all honesty, it's pretty safe drug, and still, despite that, we have such less market penetration of the drug, and it was the only drug for a while. And right. How can we increase the market penetration of systemic treatment, especially biologics, for our patients?
Well, I do feel like AD is kind of where psoriasis was about 10 years ago. And having multiple entries into the category, I think, is a good thing for patients, and it's a great thing for clinicians, because if there's one thing that I know you want to have as a clinician, is choice and the opportunity to be able to customize treatment for your different patients. And again, not taking a one-size-fits-all. Dupilumab has been a very good product and continues to be a very good product, but again, is it the ideal product for all patients? And being able to have choice is really important. I think the bigger issue in terms of why less than 10% of patients with moderate to severe atopic dermatitis are being treated, again, is a function of the fact that dermatologists represent less than 1% of healthcare professionals. So there's a lot of people who are just not getting to a dermatologist. And that's where, again, whenever you see any direct-to-consumer advertising from, any of the companies, I mean, it always kind of ends with, see your dermatologist, because I think that that's a really important first step. I think that access, market access, and perception of market access also has something to do with it. So again, one of the things that we're committed to at Leo Pharma is making sure that, we don't just look at it from a clinical standpoint. I mean, first and foremost, you need to have an efficacious and safe drug. And that is the primary reason why any physician is going to prescribe it. But it also has to be a drug that is accessible to patients, meaning that you need to have a good level of market access. You need to have good patient support programs in place in order to make sure that the whole experience for the patient and healthcare professional is a positive one. There's a lot of different things that will dictate whether or not a patient gets a product and adherence to that treatment. So when I went back before talking about Leo Pharma, one of the things that kind of attracted me to Leo and talking about its size being an advantage, one of the things that I'd really like to do, and I will continue to do, and I'm only into this job for 4 months now, but continue to understand from the medical dermatology company, what are your expectations from a partner, and how do we move from a transactional relationship, being a pharmaceutical company, to truly being a partner that understands your needs as a clinician, but also understands the needs of the patients, and what can we do in order to bridge that gap? So that's where things like making sure that the whole pathway from writing the prescription to actually having it filled and making sure that the patient adheres to their treatment are all equally important and something that we're committed to.
So I think you brought up a very, very important point about the access to the drugs, right? Unfortunately, if you look at the numbers, number one reason for dermatologist burnout is that we cannot get our patients what we want them to get. And this is across the board, not only biologics, even the branded topicals, right? We can't get anything into our patients anymore. It's been so hard in medical dermatology. So tell us, and fortunately, I know your central hub is in Louisville, Kentucky, where I practice. So tell us a little bit about your access program, your hub, and how you are. And I know you guys actually take pride in being a patient-centric company. So tell us a little bit about the patient centricity of Leo with the access to the drug.
Yeah, I mean, I really do believe fundamental to the business model has to be putting the patient at the center and kind of asking yourself, is this in the best interest of the patient? And I will challenge any of you, and I'm happy to kind of post my email, give you my cell phone number, that if anyone wants to challenge me on hypocrisy of Leo Pharma not taking a patient or healthcare professional centric approach, I want to hear that, because that's one of the areas that we want to be able to differentiate as a company. I think, again, when I think about the early period of getting adoption of a product, it's extremely important to make sure that you're eliminating barriers. One of the barriers could be access to the product. So one of the things that we have done at Leo Pharma is that we have decided to have a bridge program that'll last a patient up to 2 years for those commercially eligible patients. So they need to be a patient that fits the prior auth criteria. They need to have commercial coverage, but realizing that it can be a bit of a gap initially when you're in that early launch phase. We want to make sure that we're building that bridge. We also want to make sure that we're providing the patients with the support they need. So whether it's, kind of walking them through the loading doses to the callback after, the first 2 weeks, or if they're going to move to Q4 dosing, which is an option with Adri, just how we can do that and make sure that we're supporting the healthcare professional in a way that they're also comfortable with, that we can provide that added support. So we want to be there as truly a partner in that patient journey. I think the other thing that's worth noting, however, is that the payers have been very, very anxious for another atopic dermatitis treatment, and specifically another biologic to come to the marketplace. So we've had some good payer and PBM, you could say partnerships so far, and the speed at which we're building access in the category is has been something that has been I don't want to say a surprise, but it's been at least right on target, because I think it's really important that we don't build a bridge to nowhere, so to speak, and that we are able to have a large percentage of patients reimbursed early on with this treatment. Because at the end of the day, I can argue why these drugs cost what they cost and the value of innovative biologics. And I've spent many times in many different roundtable discussions, whether it's defending it to, different people that will sometimes challenge and criticize the industry. That's a whole separate discussion. Happy to go there if you want to go there. But I think at the end of the day, kind of realizing and recognizing what a patient is able to pay out of pocket and making sure that they're able to get the treatment they deserve is first and foremost what's important to us.
Absolutely. I think that was great and very illuminating. I'm going to ask a question. I'm not sure if I should, but I'm going to ask anyway. So You are the second biologist coming to the market against Dupy. Dupy has the 100% of the market share that whatever they have, right? And access-wise. And Sanofi is a big company. It's almost like David versus Goliath. How are you planning to deal with this situation, and how are you planning to penetrate the market against this competition, which is huge?
Yeah, I mean, it is huge competition, but I also see that as opportunity. First off, I love being David over being Goliath. I was Goliath at my other company for many, many years. Started as David, and then we ended up becoming a very big company. And I'll tell you, when you are a smaller company, you need to really be sharp with the approach you take. You need to be agile. You need to be customer focused. And again, these are attributes that I want the dermatology community to be relating back to Leo Pharma. So when they talk about Leo Pharma, they're probably not going to be talking about our direct-to-consumer ads in the near future. And we just don't have that kind of budget to be able to do lots of TV ads like you can if you're a Sanofi or an AbbVie or one of the other big pharma companies. Eventually, we may get there, but that's not the short-term play. Where we can really differentiate ourselves are with the field-facing people we have, with the representatives, with our thought leader liaisons, with our medical scientific liaisons. The individuals that are servicing our healthcare professionals, we want that to be top in the industry. And again, going back to what I talked about from a patient support standpoint, from a healthcare professional support standpoint, again, that's where we want to be seen as a leader when it comes to education in medical dermatology and as a real support. That's where I want to put my resources. I want to make sure that we're focusing on peer-to-peer education. I want to make sure that we're also looking at the smart way of doing data generation in order to elucidate some of the benefits that we know that Adri has relative to other systemic treatments, and where we can clearly kind of own a position in the marketplace for it. But again, when you are the smaller company, you don't have the economies of scale. When I was with Novo Nordisk, I came to the marketplace with a next generation insulin with 19 3A studies and a cardiovascular outcomes trial. It was 20,000 patients on product before a script was ever written in the United States. That's what you can do with economy of scale. When you are small, you need to be smart and savvy about what you do. You launch generally with registration studies. You might then have some extension data like Leo Pharma does. But then you need to be clever in terms of how you structure your data, because you can't just go out and do 10 additional phase 3A studies and do as many HEOR studies as you like. You need to be a little bit selective, which inherently may create a little bit of a bias always for the big pharma versus the smaller pharma, just because of the scale that big pharma has. And that's where, again, what David has to do versus Goliath is really, I think, win the battle with the healthcare professional. Really be there for the healthcare professional, really be seen as a true partner, not just a transactional relationship. And I also want to be clear, we didn't fortuitously end up in medical dermatology based on developing indications for other therapy areas. We chose to be in medical dermatology, and we will continue to be in medical dermatology and have a pipeline that is focused in medical dermatology. So this is a company that is, it's 114 years old. And we plan on staying now in medical dermatology for the next 100 years, starting with the launch of Adri. Getting the launch of Adri right is absolutely mission critical. But what does mission critical mean? It means that we just need to get doctors to give it a try and then decide where it fits into their clinical practice. And I believe that, again, there's a rising tide for everyone to have. We know that Lilly's coming to the marketplace with another biologic option in another year or so. I think, again, going back to what I was saying about the psoriasis space 10 years ago, I think there's a rising tide phenomenon. And ideally, when we have this talk in another year or two, we can talk about the fact that 30% of patients or 40% of patients with moderate to severe atopic dermatitis are receiving an appropriate systemic treatment, as opposed to less than 10%. I think that everyone can kind of carve out their slice, and ultimately it's the patient and the healthcare professional that benefits.
So speaking of Lilly, another Goliath coming to the market, and tell us about your personal transformation, right? You were at a big pharma, and now you're at a small pharma. How does it feel personally?
It's been fun. I mean, I have to admit, there were some days where you kind of look at the P&L and you kind of think, okay, what did I get myself into? And can I please have my budget back from Novo Nordisk, because we could do things a little bit differently. But it actually makes you sharper. I mean, I can tell you, I just had a meeting with my whole company together in my hometown of Princeton, New Jersey. And 7 weeks ago, that was going to be a virtual meeting. And I'm a big fan of face-to-face interaction. I know, like we're doing right now, there is a great place for virtual, and it's nice to be able to utilize these tools. And we wouldn't be able to reach the audience that we're reaching right now without virtual tools. But if possible, I wanted to get people together. We pulled that meeting together in 7 weeks. We call it the all-in meeting because everybody in Leo Pharma is all in on Adri. I sometimes joke that we're not Leo Pharma right now, we're Adri Inc. And I need everybody all in focused in order to make that happen. The fact that we could pull that off in 7 weeks, the fact that we just launched a new campaign now that we have all of our feedback from the FDA in terms of how we can promote Adri, the time that we turn that around, way faster, way more efficient than what you can do from a big pharma standpoint. It feels more entrepreneurial. It feels like a place that people can all show up and be the best versions of themselves, as opposed to just kind of being one of many with an employee number and feeling like they're kind of getting weighed down by the bureaucracy. And I mean no disrespect to big pharma, where I spent most of my career, but sometimes I felt like I was on a super tanker in my previous job, and I would argue about changing course by 2 degrees. And finally, I'd compromise at 0.5 degrees. And 500 miles later, nobody even noticed that we changed course. I think at Leo Pharma, I mean, we can do a 180-degree turn if that's needed. And, you know, me and my management team can sit in a boardroom, make that decision, make the call, make the change, make it happen. And again, that's something that I hope the medical dermatology community is going to feel. When we get your feedback, when we hear that things should be different, when we hear there's an opportunity, I want to be seen as a company that jumps on that opportunity, which is, again, you know, David beating Goliath. Sometimes it just takes having a slightly better tool and knowing how to utilize it than just having size and might.
So if I understand correctly, I wanted to discuss a little bit the importance of US market for Leo Pharma, right? The whole center of Leo Pharma, the global center, used to be Copenhagen. Now I understand correctly. Did it move to New Jersey?
Yeah, so the corporate head office is still in Copenhagen, Denmark. However, we have a significant presence in Madison, New Jersey, which also includes a lot of global functions. And the idea is that we are really scaled up in the US, not for the company we have today, but for the company that we want to have. I'll tell you, when I was early in my career, coming from Canada to Denmark, the first time I moved there with my previous company, I used to go to meetings and my American colleagues would show up, and I almost had a bit of an allergy because they would act like, you know, they're the center of the universe. And I'd be, okay, here we go again. And then I moved to America and I'm like, as far as pharmaceuticals are concerned, it very much is the center of the universe. And quite frankly, we need to act like a company where the FDA is our #1 priority from a regulatory authority. When our clinical studies are designed, they're designed for the FDA, they're designed for US payers, they're designed for US clinicians. This has to be the default market. That's the way we're attacking it with tralokinumab, with Adri, and that's the way future developments in the pipeline will also be geared. And that's why we have folks in research and development that are global, have a global function, but are based out of the United States to make sure that all of the learnings from the US market are taken back to Copenhagen. And I realize that hasn't always been everyone's experience with Leo Pharma, but that's part of the change. And that's partly, you know, a big part of why I came here as well, is to kind of help lead that transformation. And we even made a change at the global leadership level where there's 2 commercial leaders that sit on the global leadership team. There's me having responsibility for North America, and then I have my colleague, another American, Becky Morrison, who has responsibility for the rest of the world. Just to kind of put that in perspective, it goes to show that there's kind of equal weighting between the US and the rest of the world. And quite frankly, as a future growth driver, disproportionate focus on the US.
Great. I remember Becky, actually. I'm familiar with her. She's great as well. So the other question is, now you just came, you've been around for the last 20-25 years in Novo Nordisk with the diabetic community, mostly primary care doctors. Now 3-4 months you've been in dermatology. How is the difference? How are you adjusting?
You know, if we can keep this just between us and the people on the call and not share it with my friends in the diabetology community, I can tell you, I feel like I've developed so many fast friends, yourself included, in the dermatology space. I feel like in dermatology, it is a lot more relationship based. again, I don't want anyone to misinterpret what that means. I think dermatologists, first off, all decided that they wanted to be dermatologists. I think most of you probably graduated top of your medical school. It's a very tough profession to get into, and therefore you chose medical dermatology. It didn't choose you, which is not always the case in other professions. And I don't mean that as any kind of lack of respect for other medical specialties. So you all want to be there. You're all very serious scientists, clinicians that, you know, very much care about your patients. But I don't know what it is in dermatology that it just seems like, you know, it's okay to, you know, kind of have some fun. It's okay to have you know, a bit of a laugh. Just the fact that you spend so much time in these various congresses and very much want to be together and share information with each other, I think is fantastic. And it's interesting because now that I've been in dermatology for all of 4 months, I can't see myself ever leaving dermatology. I mean, I don't plan to leave Leo Pharma anytime soon, but it is interesting when you see how kind of nepotent the dermatology community becomes on the pharma side, because it feels like once people get bit by the dermatology bug, they get introduced to this community, they don't want to leave. And I have to say, my experience so far has been overwhelmingly positive, and I can't wait to meet more people, you know, at an upcoming Congress.
You know, that's funny. I have so many friends in dermatology in the industry that they actually go from one company to another, but they stay in dermatology. As you said, it's very ironic, unlike other fields when people go to psychiatry to neurology, but not in derm. People stay in derm. It's amazing. I think the love of dermatology, not only for us as providers, but also for the whole community, including the industry, becomes so strong. It's something magical or mystical. I don't know what to say, but you're right.
And there's a real human component in dermatology about caring for the patient, because I think when you're in other disease states, if I take diabetes or cardiology, so much is dictated by clinical algorithms, and you have such tangible measures. You know, you can look at something like hemoglobin A1C as such a tangible measure in diabetes. I think given the nature of dermatology and that there is somewhat of a subjective component to it, just in terms of different patients' perception of their dermatological condition, I don't know, it seems like, and again, I'm not trying to suggest that other specialties don't care about their patients the same way, but I think in some regard, it becomes more about clinical algorithms than it does come to just sitting in front of the patient, asking them how they feel, asking them what their expectations are. And I think that there's a certain type of person that I think is really kind of lured into that. So I feel like it is very patient-centric. I feel like it's a very caring specialty. And I think that that carries over then when I'm at a conference and maybe having a few drinks later in the evening, seeing just how dermatologists like to get together. So it's been a fantastic experience so far, and really one of the reasons why I'm so happy that I made the decision to come over to Leo.
So welcome again. I just checked the Q&A box and you are already famous. Everybody wants your email address or your cell number. You offered it. So for those who wanted Brian's info, we'll give it to you later at the end. If you don't mind, Brian, maybe you can announce later on towards the end so that everybody wants it. I have a huge list of people already. Somebody said, can I have 5 minutes with Brian? So
So my admin is already cringing at me, but no, I'm happy to put my email, my coordinates out there. Again, it speaks to just even the nature of this industry and the fact that I very much, as the president of the company, I want to be able to engage with as many clinicians as possible. I want to understand, you know, I want people to be able to tell me things like, I've never understood why Leo, or I've never understood why any company hasn't ever done this. Fill in the blank for me. And there might be a really good reason that has never been explained before, or it might just be not a very good reason, and therefore let's do it. Because again, how does David beat Goliath? We do it by being a little bit smarter, a little more agile, and by, quite frankly, listening, trying to find where those opportunities are. So very, very open to feedback.
Perfect. Couple of questions from the audience. They are interested in your pipeline.
Yeah, so in the pipeline right now, we have a phase 2 product that we're just evaluating the 2A data to determine the next steps, but that's an IL-22R product. And as you know, the IL-22 is a kind of known pathway to atopic dermatitis. So trying to assess what we're doing with that product next. We're also working on an IL-17 PPI, so that would put us back into the psoriasis space. And then we're also very, very active from a business development standpoint. So one of the things that we've been looking at in the United States is that we have our existing topical franchise, we have Adri. Then given just the timing of when that next product could come available, we do have a little bit of a gap here in the US, and we're going to try to find ways that we can fill the gap and ideally stay within medical dermatology. Maybe I should just address it on this call that we had another product, which is an oral JAK, dalgocitinib, which will be available outside of the United States. Unfortunately, it will not be available in the United States due to some, I guess, differing opinions in terms of the approach that we should take, the indication we should take. It's going to be developed for chronic hand eczema, which is not really a known indication from the FDA. And when I go back and talk about just maybe Leo having more of a European orientation and less of a US orientation, I think that that's a lesson learned. But to be able to now pursue the pathway for that in the United States, it would put us too late in the game relative to the expense that we would need to go through it. So that's a bit unfortunate because it's a really interesting product. But I think the next developments that you'll see from Leo Pharma would be that IL-22 or the IL-17. I'm excited to see the data from both of those products.
So you did mention a little bit about the JAK inhibitors. So when in the market now, AD market, as you know, your competition is not only really Dupi or other biologics, but also the oral JAK inhibitors. How do you see the interplay between the biologics versus the small molecules in atopic derm?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I don't see personally the injection versus the non-injection being the primary decision point. Again, I spent most of my career with injectable therapies and even launched an oral peptide, and that didn't suddenly change the way doctors thought about that product because it was an oral versus an injectable. I think, though, one of the things that we need to constantly consider is that atopic dermatitis is a chronic disease that many patients have had since childhood, and treatment may very well be for the rest of their life. So I think the question is what are you treating and what are you willing to treat, on an ongoing sustainable basis? I mean, there's definitely a place for the JAKs, and I certainly understand the efficacy, and particularly if you're looking at severe atopic dermatitis and the patient is aware of the risk benefits and how quickly they can work. But I just wonder from a sustainability standpoint, if we're looking at treating patients for many, many years, what's the right treatment? So I think that there may be, a little bit of interplay back and forth. I've even heard situations where a patient could be, used short term on a JAK and then switch back to a biologic. Again, going back to the statement about the fact that you have less than 10% of patients on a systemic treatment. It's great that we have this additional innovation. I think obviously healthcare professionals will look at everything that they're considering. They'll look at efficacy, they'll look at safety, they'll look at monitoring, and then make a decision. I think that from a biologic standpoint, you do have a proven safety track record, and that's why we're excited to now be rolling out 3-year plus data with Adri, just to show in terms of the progressive sustainable control. But good for physicians to have multiple options.
Yeah. So we discussed the pipeline, and when you were discussing the pipeline, I noticed it's all systemic biologics mostly, and you mentioned the JAK that you have outside of US, but you used to be a topical company. You brought Taclonex or Davobet in Europe to the marketplace, which was a huge revelation, huge contribution to psoriasis. I think the combination of vitamin D and the steroid, it was a huge evolution in dermatology. Having said that, you guys are shying away from the topicals, and I know it has been very difficult to get the topicals into the market access. What do you think? How is dermatology transforming from topical treatment to systemic?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's unfortunately, I mean, we are running a business, and as part of running a sustainable business, we need to make sure that we have products that can generate a positive EBITDA. And if I take a product like Instalar, which I hear constantly is a really terrific product to use. First off, I hear physicians having difficulty in being able to prescribe it, despite the fact that we continue to support a lot of different patient support programs. when we look at what's referred to as our gross to nets, and that's something that, you know, every company will be obsessed about. So there's the list price, but the net price is ultimately what we make as profit before, or at least revenue before subtracting the cost of goods and some of the other expenses. It is a fraction of the list price. And, you know, I think if you're launching a topical and payers will deem that the API on it is largely generic, there's not a premium that they're willing to pay for a unique formulation. And even if there's unique API, very, very difficult to be able to get any kind of decent reimbursed price. So again, regardless of what the list price is, the amount of rebate that gets paid to the payers, the amount of investment that has to go in patient support program means that companies are literally making pennies on the dollar. And when you're making pennies on the dollar with a topical product, really, really difficult to transform a company and to kind of lead it to help support future innovation. It's a great question, and it's something that, you know, I'd like to continue to explore with the team, because again, if there continues to be a need for some of these different topical treatments, then maybe Leo Pharma can play a role. But again, it has to make sense from a business standpoint. And that's the other kind of David versus Goliath type issue that, you know, we always need to keep in mind. If you're large pharma, you're only going to be focused on the big blockbuster. And you also have a lot of leverage over the payers because you're coming forward with a broad portfolio and can leverage that portfolio across multiple therapy areas in order to kind of try to come to some type of negotiation with the payer. If you're a smaller company and you're trying to bring, say, another topical to market, what leverage do you have? The payers basically hold all of the power in that situation. So it means, you know, a challenging situation. That the good news is that we have these new systemic treatments. And I think, again, if we go back to the psoriasis space, I think we would all agree that we've advanced psoriasis dramatically over the last decade, and now atopic dermatitis is moving into that same direction with multiple systemic treatments. That's the good news. It does sometimes, though, come at the expense of new and innovative topicals, which is a little bit of a challenge, isn't it?
It sure is, and I'm fully aware of what you just said in US, unfortunately, from the payer's perspective. I wonder, is it the same in Europe, globally? Is it any different? How is it?
It is different. I mean, Europe and other countries around the world, first off, there's just different patent lengths, and then there's different kind of, you know, whether it's data protection as a form of intellectual property from registration that may differ from country to country, but you don't have that same gross to net type situation. So what you'll see in other countries around the world is much lower list prices. And I think politicians will, you know, whether it's deliberate or not deliberate, but there'll be an incorrect assumption that other countries are paying a lot less for their drugs than what we're paying in the United States. And that's, again, because we're not seeing what the real price is in the United States. We have a situation where we have very, very high list prices, relatively speaking, to other countries around the world in the US. But then we have the PBMs and the payers taking a fairly significant cut. You have the support through different patient support programs. You have various distribution fees, whether it's contracting with specialty pharmacy and dispensing fees, and everybody kind of has their hand in the pot. And when I say that, I'm not trying to vilify anyone. It's just a very different setup in America, which has become a little bit of this medical industrial complex. Remember, we used to talk about the military industrial complex. Well, it's almost like a medical industrial complex where it just generates so many, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars in so many different directions. It's the system that we have, and it's the system that still disproportionately contributes to innovation and research and development. I mean, I always say there's two things that America disproportionately contributes to. One is NATO, and the other is innovative pharmaceuticals in terms of research and development. But how it actually manifests itself, though, is that you get these very complex gross to net situations, and it means that you end up in certain disease states having a regression more to biologics and higher price products at the expense of having other products in the marketplace. If I just compare it to my Canadian affiliate, we have a whole portfolio of products that are still in the marketplace in Canada that aren't available in the United States because of the genericization.
That's amazing, unfortunately, for us here in the US. I do have a question from an audience, and it's ironic. It sort of goes back to Dupi. The question was, how do you get rid of this emotional attachment to the first kid on the block, right? It's really a good question, but a tough one to answer, maybe.
I love that question because it is like an emotional attachment. One of the things that I talked about with dermatologists being big on relationships, I mean, I think there is a relationship with the first biologic to kind of serve their needs in atopic dermatitis. And, you know, I've been saying for years that, you know, the biggest challenge that you have, if I'm working in, for example, the obesity space previously, it wasn't competing against other anti-obesity medications, it was competing against clinical inertia. And here again, I think there's a little bit of this clinical inertia. Now, dupilumab, it's a very good product, and it's served the dermatology community very well for 5 years or so. However, I have never been in a therapy area where physicians don't want to have choice. And I've also worked in single payer markets before, where if you have no choice because of limited reimbursement, and some government bureaucrat is deciding which product you can use and which products you can't, that's a terrible situation. So then I do find it almost a little bit shocking in a way that, healthcare professionals aren't chomping at the bit in order to try Adri just to understand how it works, and not just in a few patients that maybe haven't got to their treatment goal with Dupi, but in bio-naive patients. Part of that, though, I think was a tactical error, quite frankly, on the part of Leo Pharma. And I kind of glossed over also a question that you asked before. It's a combination of COVID, really hard to kind of build the market while everybody is working virtually. And if you think about kind of the pre-launch phase for Adri, it was primarily during the pandemic phase. So when you would normally be coming to kind of live meetings, you'd be meeting with a medical scientific liaison, those were happening virtually, and I just think that they just don't have the same impact. It's harder to convey the information. Then we hit a complete response letter, which again was related to the device component. It was actually resolved very, very quickly. There was no questions on efficacy or safety, but that also kind of delayed things. And I think there was this pent-up demand and then a little bit of a letdown because of that CRL. And then if I could have joined Leo a little bit early, and I don't mean this as any disrespect to my Leo colleagues, but I think the one tactical mistake we made is when you first get approval for a drug, you're limited in what you can promote. And you submit your promotional claims to what's referred to the OPDP branch of the FDA. And some companies may go out and launch and just disregard that and do it at risk. Adri or Leo very much is kind of, let's follow the rules and let's make sure that we're doing things the right way. But what it meant is that we armed our sales reps out with, quite frankly, the weakest possible data on Adri. It was our 16-week data that requires all kinds of explanations on the clinical study design. It is the best placebo performance I have ever seen in a clinical study. And quite frankly, if that's the first impression that we made in the marketplace, I can understand why doctors are kind of thinking, really, is this as good as you say it is? So the fact now that we're coming out with expanded promotion materials with expanded data showing short-term itch relief as well as showing 3-year data, I believe that will have doctors kind of rethink a little bit that emotional attachment with Dupi, and at least find a significant cohort of patients with Adri to give it a try.
Well, I have to confirm on that. Unfortunately, your slide deck and the marketing material was quite weak, and I know now that I'm gonna be actually part of your speaker training this weekend. So I'm looking forward to the new slide deck, and I'm very familiar with it. So the long-term data is quite impressive, and as well as the safety and efficacy. So it's great to see that transformation actually. So I'm happy to be part of that, and you're 100% correct. I think it needed to change, and it's getting there. So we're getting close towards the end. What's next for Leo Pharma? Where do you see Leo in 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, first off, we see a very successful launch of Adri, and we see it really contributing to the treatment of moderate to severe atopic dermatitis. And again, when we have this conversation, say 5 years down the road, we're going to talk about how transformative it has been that us, together with several other companies, really help to work with the healthcare professional community, with the dermatology community, to help more patients with these systemic treatments. So, I mean, that's number one, a positive thing. And we can define success a bunch of different ways, but we just need to carve out our slice, and I'm confident that we're going to get that. I'm also confident that we will find another product in the near term, and we're pretty active from a business development standpoint, but also really excited about what we have in the pipeline and what our future R&D looks like. The fact that we have a plan to take this company public, hopefully successfully, and we'll fully capitalize this company. What that will mean after having success with Adri is that we will have the resources to invest in even more in R&D. So I think, I would like for anyone who's on this call to kind of reflect on this, and when we talk a year from now, 2 years from now, and 5 years from now, maybe to reflect on the turning point for Leo Pharma. For me, the turning point was already last week when I had my whole company together for this all-in meeting, and we talked about this, new data that we're putting out there and just how good that long-term data looks. And by the way, short-term data as well. Putting it all together, it's kind of like now we can finally put our best foot forward. And I feel like the medical dermatology community will respond to it. And I believe that 5 years from now, people will be looking at Leo Pharma as a serious leader in medical dermatology, as a trusted partner, as somebody that they've been cheering for, and quite frankly, has delivered on the promise of being truly healthcare professional and patient-centric.
That's great. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No. I hope I'm not overselling it, but as you can tell, I'm really excited about this.
No, absolutely not. And I really think it's very exciting to hear a whole new perspective from a new person in medical dermatology. So I'm also excited to be part of this program. I was just checking the Q&A. There was one final question. It says, as you mentioned about the patient centricity and the hubs and the access, how about the partnership with dermatology community? How do you see that partnership?
Well, I love the word partnership because I feel like for far too long, pharma has had a transactional relationship with healthcare professionals. I mean, you have to ask yourself, what is a partnership? And a partnership means that, we're both in it for a shared objective. And that shared objective has to be around treating the patient and putting them at the center and making their life better. So that's where, it was no joke when I said I want to get my coordinates out there, because I want to hear from you in terms of what that partnership looks like. When we have a sales rep calling on you, is it just a transactional relationship where they're dropping off samples and telling you how to prescribe the product and, pulling out their iPad to sell the product? Or are they actually listening to what your needs are? Same with our thought leader liaisons. We have a wonderful team of TLLs, our medical scientific liaisons. Are they providing you with the scientific information that you need to be able to make appropriate treatment decisions? What are some of the gaps in education? What are some of the gaps in terms of just how patients are even getting on the product? We talked before about what we're doing from a hub and a patient support standpoint and why we're trying so hard to get quick market access. We want to make the experience for you as, I guess easy isn't the right word, but how can we find the right way to work together to get the maximum and the best outcome for your patients? And that's where, again, it isn't just about Adri. It's really about, the whole support mechanisms that we provide, what we can do to further education, what can we do in order to just truly kind of meet you where you're at in your practice, understand the world that you live in, so we can provide better solutions. And that's where, again, I look forward to doing these talks in the future. And if I haven't evolved how you see Leo in terms of that partnering approach, then I shouldn't be the guy in this job.
Well, on that note, I thank you so much. I think this was a great program. It was very eye-opening. We learned a lot about you, Leo. We learned a lot about you. And I'd like to thank for your support and look forward to seeing you in the next meeting. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate it.
Any final announcements, Roxanne?
No, that's it for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. See you on
the next program. Thank you, Brian.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.